Wait for it, and we're live. Hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans. It's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just a couple of nerdy veterans and one chaos coordinator geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. We are the podcast that puts the fun in dysfunction. So without further ado, first, we're going to have to apologize. Madam Stabby Stab couldn't make it. She ditched us to make lemon bars. So Nick will be happy, but the rest of us will just have to mourn her absence.
And the lemon bars. I mean, really, she's making lemon bars and I'm not getting any. I think this is unfair.
That's
she
what I'm
made
thinking.
a molten lava crumble cookie. It was amazing.
All right, field trip to the Garber house. We're going to take over the mountain. And then while we're up there, we will get Hillbilly to play his dueling banjo, just so we know we're in the mountains. All right, with that being said, I'm going to let our guests introduce themselves. So we've got Mr. William Joseph Roberts, affectionately known as the Hillbilly.
Why do you want to start with me? You always picking on me first, JR. What's this all about? Pick on Moog. Pick on the pilot dude over there.
You can't see him. See, he was in camouflage.
Oh, well, shit. Okay, fine. All right. I am William Joseph Roberts. I write sci-fi, fantasy, horror, anything the evil mind squirrels demand of me, and I am the lead publisher at Three Ravens Publishing. And now I'm working on our list from Imaginarium because we got a whole bunch of finalists this year.
And he's totally not caffeinated. This is just natural him. True story. All right, and then because we are gentlemen, I'm just going to go around robin. We got Miss Jana S. Brown. Sometimes she has other personalities, but we're not allowed to talk about those.
I know, it's a big secret. You can't tell. I'm Jana S. Brown. I also write under the pen name Jenna Ray. That's where I write my speculative fiction. So it's urban fantasy, science fiction, fantasy, things that go boomer or magical. And sometimes there's smoochies in there too, because we got to be well-rounded. And I'm glad to be here again. This is going to be fun.
All right, and then we got Mr. Casey Moores.
I'm Casey Moores, as you just said. I write largely military science fiction, some fantasy. Again, where the mind squirrels go. I got some historical fiction with Three Ravens over there in JTF 13. Some post-apocalyptic, kind of go wherever, but largely military science fiction. And I got a big series launching this summer, to be honest.
Are you sure you're Casey Moores? Are you sure that's not what the government wants you to think? They could have swapped you at birth.
That's always possible. You never know.
It's possible. All right, and last, last but certainly not least, we have Mr. William S. Frisbee Jr.
Hey, I'm William Frisbee. I write science fiction, military science fiction, try to go hard science fiction. I do fantasy mostly. I'm trying to dabble with urban fantasy, but I also run the website Writing Military Science Fiction, which has been around since the 90s, and that's what I do.
You said you write hard sci-fi, but do you write hard fantasy?
No.
Okay. Just checking. We got to make sure. Cover all our bases. All right, and Casey, since you haven't been on since we rebranded from the Sci-Fi Shenanigans, those many years ago, we got to ask you the religion questions. Are you ready for this, sir?
I am ready.
All right. Game of Thrones, The Wheel of Time, or Chronicles of Narnia?
Narnia. Out of those.
Excellent answer. What makes that stick out for you?
Honestly, I would have gone Lord of the Rings if that was an option, but Narnia mostly because I never really got into the Wheel of Time and I soured on Game of Thrones as some did. So really I love the build up of the Game of Thrones, and then but Narnia, honestly, it's kind of classic. It was also better crafted from a meaning standpoint, I think, out of all those. So of course, maybe if I got into Wheel of Time, I would learn more, but who knows?
All right, and because shamefully nobody asks us our favorite dinosaur once you get to be a certain age, I'm going to ask you today, sir, your favorite dinosaur.
Ankylosaur.
Excellent answer.
Clubtail.
We don't hear that one often enough. We need to hear it more. All right, and because you already told us the last time you were here your favorite sci-fi, what's your favorite zoo animal?
My favorite what?
Zoo animal.
Zoo animal. Ooh. Oh, geez. I will go with the koala bear. We were just at the San Diego Zoo, and I think that was my favorite while I was there. So, yeah.
They are cute and cuddly, but they'll rip your face off. I like it.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and because we are civilized human beings, we are no longer knuckle-dragging troglodytes. Coffee or tea, sir, and how do you take it?
Coffee, black like my soul.
You have a soul still?
Well, like it was. Like
Okay,
in the
just
before
checking.
time. In the before time.
Yeah, so when we ask the gingers that, they never say black like my soul. They just say black like your soul because they don't have any.
Black like somebody else's soul would be if it was very black.
Yeah.
Dark.
Yes, Hillbilly?
No, I have souls. See, I've got a lot of souls. Well, they're under the ink, but I collected lots and lots of souls over the years. They're mine.
Yes, but they're all dark.
So we need to write a Reaper themed story with him being a ginger, and every time he collects a soul, a new freckle appears.
Oh, I like that one.
Oh.
I hate you right now.
You're already planning an anthology, aren't you?
This
All
happens
right.
every time. We come up with new podcasts and new anthologies.
I can't help myself sometimes. When you really think about it, though, it's Nick's fault. I don't know how yet, but it will be. Give me some time.
Everything is Nick's fault.
Everything is Nick's fault. All right. So the topic that brought us here, it was suggested by people that forgot to show up. But the idea of talking about mercenaries in speculative fiction. So what is it about the idea that makes it so enduring that you see so many of them?
I think it's a conflict. Stories are written about conflict. And what better conflict can you get than mercenaries?
They're the most mutable, the most, I guess, flexible, I guess, in some ways. You know, it's easy to spell out who the good guys and the bad guys are when you have one nation fighting another, and obviously it's from the point of view of one side or the other. The mercenaries can turn everything gray. And like you said, give a little bit more complex conflict in the middle of that.
Okay, I can see that. I don't know. When I see mercenaries in a story, I already automatically think of them as not as much of the good guy. I mean, obviously, with the exception of the A-Team, because for me, like most of us served, and the idea that they did it just for the money, what we did for our country, just something about that always rubs me the wrong way. It can be done well. I've got some authors I've read who did it well, but I think overall, traveling around and killing things just for money kind of always felt a little crass. So
it can be, but I read a short story where the mercenaries were hired because the planet had been mostly decimated, and so they were hanging on to their own people due to the fact they needed the genetic material to repopulate, and they were still under attack. So it was one of those, we have to have somebody to shove between us and the bad guys because we're getting our butts kicked. And so in that case, the mercenaries were, that force that went between a planet that was getting decimated and everybody else, because they could afford the money, they couldn't afford the personnel. So you've got that in there too, that sometimes the good guys just flat can't muster up the army. They gotta hire somebody.
yeah, I think that's where it comes down to. The good or bad from the mercenary is determined by the jobs they take, I would guess.
No, 100%.
Because there can still be righteous jobs.
And that's where it can easily be sliding along that scale between, good and evil, or good guys, bad guys, if you want to spell it that way. It's both in the leadership of that, what jobs they take, how they execute those jobs. That's where all that fluidity, all that flexibility, all the different ways that you can paint that come out. All those opportunities.
There was, sorry.
No, go ahead.
There was one series I read a while ago by Joel Rosenberg called the Metzada Mercenary Corps. And that was like what Jen was saying. Their homeworld had been destroyed. They were all living in a colony. If they didn't take jobs, regardless of the job, good or bad, their people starved. So I think it's like it generates conflict. It's got to give them a reason. And sometimes you have to make the hard decisions.
I think it was
that's another aspect of it. Sorry, you were asking why it is useful in fiction. It also, they are always generally expected to be the ones that are bearing the brunt of the fighting. You look back in history at the times in like Middle Ages through the Renaissance when mercenaries were very heavily used by nations. They are the ones that they sent out there. They are the ones that that were sent to the front lines to fight all their conflicts. It's the same way in some of the universes we write in. The Four Horsemen, everything is entirely fought by the mercenary units. So that is where the conflict is happening, like William said.
I think one example that did it really well is B.B. Larson's The Undying Mercenary series. And the concept there was that, yes, they were doing it to get paid, but if they didn't provide mercenary services, this alien political entity would just destroy all of humans so someone else can use the planet better. So they were, while they were fighting for money, the secondary, or I guess the primary reason was because, we don't want all of Earth to die. And so and that made it less, I mean, it almost felt like, yes, they were technically mercenaries, but they were also soldiers for their home. So it kind of made it easy for me to digest and root for it.
Well, and you asked, though, why is it enduring? And that's what you're hitting on. It's the why are they mercenaries and why are they doing this beyond the getting paid? Because when we look at it and we say, yes, it's just a soulless thing, I will kill anybody for anybody, end of discussion, all done. Then we look at it and go, yeah, you suck. But for so many of these really interesting stories, there's always another level to it that says, yes, we do want to get paid because money makes the world go round, the worlds, and when we're talking sci-fi, go round. But usually they also have other reasons. They tend to have their own moral code within their mercenary band. There's definitely a lot of band of brothers going on there where it's, yes, we're out doing a crappy job that somebody else hired us to do, but we don't leave our guys behind. We make sure that it's done right. And if our employers screw us, then we're coming back after them. So there's all these interesting rules around the way that they function. And I love digging into that and seeing, why are they doing the jobs? What's really at the heart of this? And who are they outside of who hired them? That's why it sticks around for me.
So would you guys consider something like a bounty hunter story mercenary because they're essentially cops for hire, which is much like we think mercenaries as armies for hire? Or would that be something?
That's the same kind of thing. I mean, bounty hunters skip traces. It's still the brass tacks of it. It's still a merc. They're still getting paid to do a job, regardless of what that job is. I mean, you get back into some of the older mercenary stuff, like, Robert Howard in his Conan stories. Conan was, worked his way up through from being a soldier in a free company to being a captain to eventually being a general running an entire army of free mercs. And they went from place to place, and their job was to kill whatever they were told to go kill. And he did a beautiful job of this and showing the dynamics of him being the commander or working his way up through the ranks to get to that point.
So because we labeled this speculative fiction, Mercs and speculative fiction instead of science fiction or fantasy, so we can cover all of the things. Do you think any of the sort of subgenres of spec fic make a better breeding ground for mercenary stories, or can it work in any environment?
It can work in most environments, and it's most. Yeah. But if you're going to put it somewhere based in the real world, it's a little bit timeline based. But even then, only so far.
Well, I mean,
there's still a lot of wiggle room.
You can easily do it in sci-fi and fantasy. I mean, that absolutely those two.
Yeah.
You can do. I mean, depending on how you got it set up. I mean, think about a Shadowrun, and you could easily do something with mercs in that where they're hunting down that pain in the ass thing or whatever. I mean, JTF is almost working as mercs. I mean, they're part of the government, but they're detached and they're doing the job.
But mercenaries could easily exist in that world, and maybe that's something we could explore. But anyway,
yeah.
So would you consider Black Ops then? Because what you're describing is off the books Black Ops. I wouldn't necessarily consider that mercenary because they're still working for the government. There's just that plausible deniability. To me, that's separate than true mercenary.
It is. I mean, the mercenary, they're working it. They're doing it for the money. We know that.
It depends. You can you can hire mercenaries to conduct Black Ops. Sometimes that's how they're executed, and then the antagonists can also be mercenaries. Your Black Ops could be conducted against mercenaries, and you could also be hiring them to conduct in the first place. So it could be on both ends. It depends.
And if you're doing historical fiction, I mean, one of the perfect examples of that are the Vikings.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they hoard themselves out left and right as hired hands or hired swords to do whatever for whatever lord that was going to pay them and feed them.
Well, and the sellsword is kind of a classic. I mean, you see it in spaghetti westerns, you see it in fantasy. You know,
Yeah.
the guy who
Mhm.
rides into town and is hired to take care of the problems, and then he does his thing and rides off into the sunset. Whether that's science fiction or weird western or any of those things, that sellsword thing is, you know, it's a classic used across those kind of things. You see it in D&D all the time. Urban fantasy, you see Mercs on a lot of urban fantasy properties, because especially there you've got, you know, weird creatures that you're hunting and this, that, and the other, and you don't want the vampire to eat you. You want it to eat some guy that you paid to go and do that. And Alana Andrews has a whole mercenary guild that's all based on going and hunting down critters and the payouts that you get for it based on all these different things. So I think we can use it in almost any spec fic. It's again, is there a job to do? Is it a job that normal people either can't or don't want to do? And is there payment happening? So my question then is, do we put people like Malcolm Reynolds in there? Because his were not necessarily violent jobs, but they were jobs he was doing for money. So where's our line between to be a mercenary? Does it have to be deadly? Does it have to be a violent job, or does it just have to be, you know, get a ship, get a job, keep flying?
Yeah, but Mal was a smuggler, just like Han. I mean, are you going to classify Han as a merc?
I have the same question about
If there's
Han.
a threat of
Are
violence, there's
they
a
mercs?
capability of either encountering or executing violence. You know, some of his jobs did require that, some of his jobs didn't. Sometimes it was just the threat of force that did it. Sometimes it didn't require it at all. So, but there was always the threat. You know, if the Alliance found them doing the train job, then violence would be occurring in a hurry, and there is an inherent danger in that does let it sort of more to the mercenary style job.
I think it was more with Malcolm X and Han Solo. It's more a job of opportunity. They weren't dedicated mercenaries. They were just, I'll get paid for that, or I could get paid for smuggling, or I could get paid to move cattle around. So I wouldn't call them dedicated mercenaries per se. They might take mercenary jobs, but I think there needs to be a difference between you've got a professional that's what they focus on versus someone who just does it as a side job.
If you're doing it for the pay, though, and you're working outside of national political bounds, where do you draw the line then?
I'm a computer consultant. Am I a merc?
Well,
I think in the realm of speculative fiction, it's the ability to conduct violence one way or the other. You know, and even that can be fluid. You know, it can stretch that definition even further, like we say, if we get into cyberspace, if that's where you want to play. Who knows?
Well, and you know, it does, like you said, it doesn't always have to actually be violence. It could just be the threat of violence. I mean, if you look at, you know, in the Mech Warrior universe, especially on the mercenary side of things, you're hired to just be doing guard duty. You're doing patrol. You're doing just security job. You know, you're no different than any other rent-a-cop down the street, except you got bigger guns.
Yeah.
So, you know, I mean, if you go by that definition, the rent-a-cop over here at the Shaw plant is technically a merc. They're doing security job for pay. So you know, it's a gray area, I guess.
Well, in my story Overrun in the Fallen Empire universe, I actually have a rescue company, and it's sort of you know, maybe sort of like the dock wagon or whatever, of similar to the dock wagon of the Cyber in Shadowrun, in that their purpose is just to go out, get injured people, bring them back for the client, but they also have armed escorts. They've got Sandy's flying overhead cover, so if they encounter the enemy, because the enemy is still going to be fighting their client, and they need to be able to defend themselves. So they have the capability for violence, but that's not their purpose. But they are still mercenaries for that reason.
Okay. Has anybody else besides Casey written mercenaries in their worlds? I have not. I've read plenty of them. I haven't actually written it.
Yeah, I actually wrote a book about a recon unit. And what they do is they sneak in there, they observe the objective, and then they might provide sniper support when the main unit comes in. But they were definitely mercenaries, and they provide not just sniper fire, but information for oncoming forces. So I would still call them mercenaries because they were they were on the pointy end. They carried weapons and they killed people for money. And I think that's a key thing is a mercenary traditionally is someone who fights for pay. And sometimes they fight for the government, but at the end of the day, they're willing to stick their weapon, their sword, or shoot somebody for a paycheck. And I think that's also kind of a difference between bounty hunters. I mean, William, you mentioned bounty hunters are kind of mercs, but I kind of think that bounty hunters bring people in alive. They're doing it for a job. They're using violence, but
and
it's a slightly different approach.
Some of those bounties were dead alive too.
Yeah.
It all depends on the scenario. I mean, how much of a badass are they? Do they just need wiped out to save everybody trouble? You know? But
yeah,
I mean,
but I just can't think of Stephanie Plum. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, sorry. I was saying that's no different than hiring an assassin. I mean, they're marked for hire.
But is a merc more on the killing side or something else? And that maybe we should define that as, what defines a merc versus someone with a regular job. Is it the threat of violence that they use, or is it the level of violence that they use?
What do you think, Nick? You've been awful silent. I know you're trying to let the guests speak, but we want to hear what you think too.
When it comes to mercenaries, I mean, you saw this quite a bit in the global war on terror. You had the PMCs, private military contractors. Most of them were doing guard stuff, protecting infrastructure or protecting assets, people, things like that. I think, I don't know if violence is really the line that you draw what makes a merc, but they're civilians doing a military-esque job. So the threat of violence is always there because you might have to protect the infrastructure, you might have to protect an asset, or you might have to just protect yourself. So I just think that kind of goes with the job of being a mercenary. So like if you're an independent contractor working for an IT firm, are you a mercenary? Technically, yeah, you don't belong to that organization, but you are getting paid by them to do a job. So it's kind of my thoughts on it.
Well, and I do wonder, some of what we classically think of with space mercenaries is that they're a group. We do talk about the individual sellsword, but more frequently when we talk about mercenaries, we talk about it with an S. And so we're talking about merc groups that are doing this, that, or the other. And maybe that's part of it too, and part of the difference between that individual bounty hunter, sellsword, whatever, and the mercenaries, which are a type of organization, and you get a group of them that are then hired out to do stuff. So I wonder if maybe that's also part of where our lines are, is the difference is that group.
That line of work too, you want to work with people that you can trust, and that's why they're probably usually in like a group or a team. They're all people that have that they can trust. They probably served together in the military at some point, and then they're like, hey, we can make a lot more money doing the same job, but not having the rules. So, and you see that quite a bit in like the Riddick universe. There's always mercs going after them, and they're always a group, and it's always the new guy that comes in and is like, oh, I don't know if we should be doing this, and that guy goes away very quick and mostly a violent way. So it's like, shut up, rookie.
Defenestrated.
Yeah, blow him out the airlock, whatever.
You were asking what goes into it. Again, I think it's the capability, but it can also be the risk that they're putting. So, you have that civilian contractor or whatever who is in a combat environment. We can still maybe consider them mercenaries because there's not just the threat of them having to do violence, there's the threat of violence being acted on them or, executed against them. So they are taking that risk. They're taking the same risks as somebody in the military. So that can maybe be the wide scope of it, either the capability or the risk.
So according to Wiki, because I went ahead and we tend to use that as our quick definition, a mercenary, also called a merc, is a soldier of fortune or hired gun, is a private individual who joins an armed conflict for personal profit who would otherwise be an outsider to said conflict. So that's a lot more narrow than what we had. And so some of the examples, like maybe a bounty hunter wouldn't qualify, even though technically they're gun for hire as well. They're doing it in a law enforcement capacity. But time zones are a thing, and I messed up. So Shady is better late than never, and we're glad you came.
Happy to be here. Proud to serve. No, I realized that daylight savings time is really effing with my internal clock because it was still light out and we were starting a podcast, and I was real surprised.
Well, you get a pass because you're out west somewhere in the hills with the Air Force. So
Yeah, straight north of Moops over here.
Leave it to the worthless pilot. Yep, I see how it is.
Yep,
Ooh, harsh.
definitely.
Somebody had good
Especially-
TNT. I'm just saying.
Yeah,
So,
one of us had good TOT this time.
so have you ever written Shady? Because we were talking about any examples of stuff we've written on our own. Have you written any mercenaries in your stories?
I have. In fact, the book that I'm planning on putting out here late spring, early summer will be a double Merc story almost, where he is a mercenary who retired and then gets essentially drawn back into a conflict. Now he pushes more of the bounty hunter stereotype than the mercenary at this point, but and I've done I did a short and Moops has probably already talked about this. Bill, I can't remember. Did you do what was it? The most recent one, Phoenix Initiative.
Missions.
Yeah. Frisbee.
Bill, Bill, were you on Phoenix? Were you in the? Have you been done anything in the Four Horsemen with us yet? Have you played?
I
there?
have.
Yeah, I know he's done.
I did, yeah.
Four Horsemen stuff.
First mission specifically.
Yeah. I did Brass, which was a recon team.
Okay,
Gotcha. Yeah. So First Missions was actually one of my first Merc companies into the 4HU. Every other story I'd written previous to that for the 4HU was not about Mercs somehow. But
You wrote in the Four Horsemen mercenary universe and didn't write about mercenaries. That's a skill.
And the fans absolutely loved it. And by that I mean they really, really warmed on it.
My last Four Horsemen novel, it was apparently not about mercenaries. It had mercenaries, but it wasn't centric. It was a companion novel. I
was gonna say you wrote a companion novel too.
Yeah. Everything else. Well, even Bull's not really a mercenary. He's more of a on his own thing. He's more of an independent contractor.
I mean, if Deadpool's a Merc with a mouth, Bull can be a Merc.
All right.
So
he just makes the contracts.
We've talked about some of the Mercs in literary fiction and in TV, but we haven't talked about some of the games. So Hillbilly, you found this this game that was a mercenary game, correct? You want to tell us about that? Because I am not familiar with this.
Well, found isn't the right word. I used to play the crap out of the original edition of this. Jagged Alliance absolutely had that A-team vibe. You're running your team. You have to hire them. You have to supply them, get the gear and all that kind of stuff. And basically going down to some South American island or South American country and helping them with their revolution to overthrow the drug lord or whatever. I used to play the crap out of this. You could do a LAN party or just do a dial-up connection with a buddy and play one-on-one on it. And it's straight up turn-based. I mean, this is when it was like, okay, your turn, you do your thing, you get to move, now you get to fire, and all that kind of stuff. And it all depended on your action points for the characters and all that kind of stuff. But it was great putting you in that vibe. If I was going to sit down and write something, playing this beforehand to get myself into that zone, like if I wanted to write something Mac Bolin-ish, hell yes, I'd be playing this. Because it was just that type of thing,
Okay. Yeah, I don't think I've played many games where you were doing the mercenary thing. Most of the time, you are in those type of games. You're fighting for your race, as in don't let the humans die to the aliens, or you're fighting for your country or your political bloc. But definitely sounds interesting. I used to love them turn-based games back in the day.
Well, I know they're available on Steam. And you can't
Everything's available on Steam.
Maybe I'm
So
misremembering, but was it XCOM?
Yeah.
Wasn't the first
Yeah.
XCOM technically Mercs, and then they made them part of the
Yeah.
country after?
Hmm.
Yeah.
A more modern Merc game is War Tales, but that's more swords and sorcery, where you get a small team of Mercs and hire and
Well, then you had Mech Warrior
Interesting.
Mercenaries came out in the late
Yeah.
mid-late
That was
90s.
one of my favorites. I was going to bring that one up. Yeah, I love BattleTech, and BattleTech had lots of mercenaries, and then the Mercenaries game was awesome.
Mercenary 4 came out, or I think it was 4. I literally did not sleep for an entire week because I got it on a Sunday, and I had the joystick, I had the rudder pedals, the throttle quadrant, and I was all set up. I'm sitting there playing, and it's like, shit, I gotta get ready for work. Go to work, get done with work. I'm wide awake because I have popped no-dos and mini-fans during work. Okay, cool, let's play some more. Oh shit, I gotta go to work again. I did this for an entire freaking week, and I beat the game. But I had the targeting reticle with the armor and HUD, everything burned into my retinas.
So you experienced a tenth of what those poor pilots would have felt if they were doing it for real.
Yeah, a tenth of those poor pilots, hillbilly.
Hey, I do have some respect for them goons there. Oh,
So are there any other universes? I mean, we've talked about the Undying Mercenary, and obviously the Four Horsemen had mercenary units because it's kind of the premise. In BattleTech, are there any others where mercenaries play such a pivotal role in the stories?
Hammer Slammers.
I've heard of it, obviously, but I haven't read that one.
It's a classic. David Drake. And then there's Boy and His Tank. That was another classic mercenary.
Okay. So has anybody else got any that come to mind for them when they think mercenaries?
Well, I mean, I just finished writing one. It's a little bit more contemporary. It's a little bit more near future military science fiction. It's going to be the third novel in a series called Blood and Armor that's coming out. First book comes out April 19th. I'm sorry, I'm self-promoting here, but I just finished writing the third book, and that relied very heavily on mercenaries among the adversary. Short version is the protagonists have combat armor, and that has given them a significant military edge among all their enemies. And by the third novel, those enemies are starting to heavily use mercenaries as a means of countering them with basically older versions of combat suits that the Russians developed, the Uratnik 3, the Sotnik 3, and they're coming up with all these different concepts through the use of mercenaries to try and counter this military edge.
So,
and I based it, along some of the recent units that we've groups, the Wagner group that was operating in the Ukraine for a while, and some of the more seedier of the world's current mercenary units.
So let me ask everyone this. By the definition we used earlier, mercenaries are operating for countries that aren't theirs. Now, all of us are Americans, so we have our reference of the American Revolution and the Hessians that were mercenary troops contracted by the British, but they were doing so as representatives of their nation who rented them out as a nation state. Would we qualify those as mercenaries or allies at that point, since they were fighting for their country, where their country sent them?
I think they were mercenaries per se.
Yeah, the fact that they were nationalistic mercenaries, they're still
mercenaries.
Paid to conduct somebody else's armed conflict.
With a lot of money passing.
It's the purpose is to earn money for their country, but they're still fighting somebody else's war. And to me, that's really where the line is.
See, and I would say that it depends on the political machinations that put them there, right? So if you like the French were allies, they weren't mercs, right? But that was because the French had the French Foreign Legion, and I'm beating you to the punch because you put it in the chat there, but the French Foreign Legion was a little different. But the French during the Revolutionary War, they had a very politically motivated reason to see us win. And so, or at the very least, drag out the conflict as long as possible. So they're not really mercs in so much that their whole political system was backing the move.
But they weren't mercs per se, but the people who joined them were usually from all around the world. They were mostly there for money. Some of them were there for citizenship.
The individuals.
So yeah, so the individuals are
were
more
working in a
mercs,
mercenary
but-
capacity, but
Uh-huh.
the organization itself wasn't really.
Yeah.
I don't think a foreign legion, which any country could start, which is a legion, a military unit comprised of non-citizens that are doing it oftentimes for citizenship in addition to pay, or in the case of the French Foreign Legion, a new identity and a chance to start over. But they're still serving a nation that is going to be theirs. I would not consider that mercenary.
Depending on how they got there. I think some of them, that's all they knew. And it's like, well, okay, I don't care about citizenship.
Well,
But they had a lot of Nazi soldiers and things like that joined in that era because that's all the soldiers knew. They couldn't care less about citizenship. It was about pay and just basic survival.
Okay.
yeah.
So I guess with the Foreign Legion, it would depend on the era, because you're right. Post World War II, there were a lot of people that just, as long as they were fighting, the government wasn't tracking them down for their war crimes.
Well, even post World War I, a lot of the conflicts they were involved with had nothing to do with the political backing of France and everything to do with, the particular branch of the Legion wanted to make money fighting in a conflict that wasn't theirs.
No, I don't know enough about their history, so I'll take your word for it. In the chat, Jana, you had an example of mercenaries in fiction that you wanted to mention.
Oh, it's just Jerry Pornell. I'd been sitting there trying to think of it, and so I finally went to the internet because I couldn't think of the name of his legion. But he has Falkenberg's Legion, and they're good people that get hired to do all sorts of interesting things. So going back into that gray line, but he's got really, really good science fiction mercs. It is a series well worth reading. I think most of them came out from Baen, and they start like in the mid 80s and go forward from that. And he's got just a crap ton of them, and they're really, really fun.
Okay. We're going to pause for a moment right there while we think about how awesome Purnell's stories were, and we're going to shamelessly shill for the man, which actually happens to be Baen today. So, boom.
When the UN invaded the freehold of Grenya, the intent was simple: force a non-compliant star nation back into the collective. The haven for every independent, rebellious, self-reliant adventurer in human space for the last 200 years. Grenya has resources beyond measure, and its inhabitants have one goal in mind: make the invaders suffer for their presumption. This isn't just resistance, it's vengeance. Freehold, Resistance, a collection of hard-hitting tales gathered by series creator Michael Z. Williamson and BaneBooks.com.
BaneBooks.com. All right. With that out of the way, thank you for sticking with us through that commercial interlude, and we'll get back to talking about the mercenaries. So what was it about Falkenberg's Legion by Pornell that made it stand out for you?
Oh, goodness. Well, they got to go to a lot of different places because it was scattered colonies. And so they were doing, I've got to pull up the very first one. Somebody else talk for a second while I pull up the name.
Well, that's one of the things that's fun to write about the mercenaries. You can send them wherever you want. So in fiction, we can put them in any situation we want to for whatever reason. Nations' militaries have to conform to certain rules, and they have to conform to the politics of their nation.
So
where conflicts are ongoing, the mercenaries can go wherever to do whatever.
So I have were you ready, Jana?
No, go ahead.
So one of the series I like had mechs in it, was by Scott Bartlett, and in this world there was no real national government. It was all corporations having their own independent sort of governments. So obviously they had their own militaries to defend themselves, where the corporation stands in for the state. Would those armies be mercenaries because they're not fighting for their country, since countries don't really exist? Or would you say no, because essentially the company becomes a de facto country? Because that's a common dystopian trope, is kind of all the countries died and it's all about the corporations.
Depends on how much the corporations are pushing like politics and ideals, right? Because if they're fighting for anything other than essentially profit, you are looking at more of a kind of an organized militia versus a merc. But the other part being is that the piece that we kind of keep touching on is that the mercenary is very individualistic. You think of them in groups, but they're all there for individual reasons, not there as a collective reason.
They can say yes or no to every individual contract. Every mission is their option to a certain degree. I mean, there obviously pressure can be applied in various fun different ways, but if it's a company's military forces, that kind of becomes a standing army again, even regardless of their ends or their purpose. It's not just a mercenary because they're a company.
Yeah.
If that corporation is territory,
Well,
and that's
what about
the forces that they're using?
Put the company BlackRock into that position right now. I mean, they're a valid mercenary company for hire, security company out there that are primarily American. I mean, they go off into some other country, or are they going to see them as Americans, or are they going to see them as a company of Mercs there to do a job?
I mean, the thing isn't going to entirely, like, that perception is only going to matter if they think that mercenary company is there to help them, right? Or they think they can be bought. And that then sits around like, you're still legally looking at them as mercs, no matter which side of that conflict you fall on. It's just whether or not they decide to, like, if they get, if they have the choice to turn down a contract, say, while they're in said country, they get another contract from the U.S. government, like, hey, we'd also like you to do this. Now, if they're able to if they actually have the ability to say no and turn it down, versus, we've actually just become a subset of the American military.
Like the Wagner Group, they fought alongside the Russians,
Mm-hmm.
But
And
they were
tried
in
to-
Syria and other places like that.
Yeah.
So
Or
I
you
guess
also-
it depends on the conflict.
Yeah.
They also go ahead.
Well, you also go back to that example of the Hessians. Were they perceived as Germans? Were they perceived as just another extension of the British Army? They're fighting for the British, but everybody looked at them as Germans here fighting us, or during the Revolution.
Yeah, but I don't think
it's something to key in.
we would have declared war on Germany.
Huh?
For that, I don't think we would have declared war on Germany because of the mercenaries. So
yeah, but there was definitely
kind
some
of, I think,
animosity
a gray area.
carried as a
Yeah.
result.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I mean, the other part being is if a single country keeps paying you well, you can't entirely blame them for taking up singular backed contracts.
Yeah, but I mean, one example that you guys used earlier was the Wagner Group fighting in the Ukraine and Syria and all those other places for the Russian government by proxy. But then they also fought the Russian government when they turned around and started marching towards Moscow till they got whatever their demands were.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I think that's a perfect example of a true mercenary, because even though at some level they were proxies for the Russian state, they were also an entity fighting for itself purely.
They still have their own individual purposes, their own individual goals,
and that's where it gets murky. So I have a question for you, Hillbilly, since you have started writing in the Car Wars universe, which is essentially gladiatorial games where they're getting paid to fight. Would you consider gladiator type scenarios where they mercenaries, or is that just no different than, I don't know, boxing or any other sport?
It's entertainment. I mean, yeah, the gladiatorial arenas were death sports, but they were hired as entertainers, or, well, they weren't necessarily hired all the time. They were just tossed into it. So, no, not mercenaries. Most of the fighters in the gladiatorial arenas were slaves, or they were prisoners that were tossed in to fight to the death to entertain the people and keep everybody busy. You have a very few that were documented that were actually there by their own will, or they earned their way out of the slave pits and became freemen again.
Okay.
Yeah, Hulk was just having a good time.
Yeah, Hulk is a gladiator. He was not a mercenary. He was just having a good time busting heads, and then they gave him shiny things and stuff to drink, and you did get that too. But I agree, the gladiators were not mercs. They didn't have any kind of choice. And a lot of the mercenary groups we talk about, there is that level. I mean, going back, I finally found the reference with Parnell, it was people that had been part of the military at one point, and then the bosses were doing crappy things. And they're like, we don't want to do this anymore. But we also still have to make money in order to keep our ships running. And so it was trying to figure out where are the good guys? How can we help the colonists and this, that, and the other? But also, how do we get paid? So they became mercenaries in that they were getting paid by colonies. They were getting paid by these other things to push back against these bigger politics, which is where they had sprung from in the first place. So we do see that kind of thing with Mercs, where it's, we do get these break-offs from political entities where they might get their training, they might get all that kind of thing, and then they decide, oh, well, the nation that we've been fighting for all this time, they're not the people that we want to represent, but you still got to have money. An army crawls on its belly, whether that is an army of 3 or an army of 3,000. You have to be able to feed them, or else the game is over.
Well,
so Mercs have to take that into account.
And Mercs more than anybody, really. Go ahead, Hillbilly. Sorry.
No, well, here's a good gray area for you: privateers. During the age of pirates, were they mercenaries or were they just working for the country they got their letters of marque under? I mean, for all intents and purposes, they were straight up mercs, man. They were out to get a buck, have the opportunity to take out these guys because they can, and it's legal, and they just got to run back to their port of choice, to be safe haven.
They're closer to mercenaries. They just had the backing of a government to legitimize everything they did.
Most mercenaries do.
Yeah. Yeah. Hillbilly, going back to the Gladiators, where do we put Car Wars in here? That's all by choice. I mean, that's largely by choice, isn't it? And they're working for a buck. They're in those gladiatorial.
Well, it's already been written in a couple of instances where, yes, this is gladiatorial games, more or less. But there's those mercs that have been hired to come in and do damage. That's a whole other subset, They've been hired to come in here, fuck some shit up, and then do their thing. Now, whether they survive or not, that's a totally different question.
On the other hand, I think you did a good job defining a gray area there, and that some turn out to be indentured services through the the gold reincarnation program or whatever. That some of them don't necessarily have a choice.
That one. Well, that was just a contract. I mean, he didn't read his contract. He signed off on it, and he died. Now Johnny owns him for the time being. He's got to pay off his debt for his reincarnation bit. And it shows how dirty the system can be. Yeah.
Easily taking advantage of it. It kind of highlights the fact that some mercenaries, as much as we think of them having a choice and the ability to turn down those contracts, like I said, pressure can also be applied, and that gets fuzzy again. Sometimes they have to take the contract, and sometimes they find that suddenly they have to take all the contracts that are offered them by a specific enemy.
I figure it doesn't surprise me that a military person would come up with that idea where not even death saves you from having to go to work tomorrow. That fits with just about every senior NCO I ever met. So I am not surprised, Hillbilly, that was you.
What?
I am not surprised that you came up with a scenario as a military person yourself where not even death stopped you from having to go to work on Monday.
Yeah.
That tracks for me.
Planes on the schedule tomorrow. Got to get in the air, FMC.
So, would you consider scenarios where they do law enforcement for hire, much like the bounty hunters, where some nations kind of use quasi-military organizations to police themselves? Would they be proxy cops, or would they be mercenaries at that point?
That's still a gray area of both. I mean, think about the Hells Angels. How many times have they been hired over the years to do security jobs for concerts and different events and things like that? I mean, they're hired mercs at that point. Granted, they're there for a threat, not necessarily to bash in heads, but if the need arises, they're going to bash in heads.
Okay. Yeah, again, that goes back to is there a threat of violence in the job that you are taking on for money, not necessarily because it's your thing? Because that's kind of what we keep circling back around to, is that the difference between the messenger person who takes your package down the street and you pay them for it, and the mercenary who is going to deliver your package in the middle of a war zone The one is the Merc and the other's a messenger, because the Merc's got to run into a potentially dangerous place where he will either have to dish out violence or take it.
Okay. All right. So Nick, do you see a lot of mercenary type organizations in the Capes and Cowls comic book world where you play?
You do, and they kind of use mercenary and assassin kind of interchangeably. But yeah, you see it in the Capes and Cowls realm of comic books all the time.
Okay. So would an organization, since we're talking, branching out, would an organization like Cobra then be considered a mercenary group because they're fighting just for the money? Or are they a terrorist group? Or how would you classify some entity like that? Would they fall under mercenary?
I think the people that work for Cobra, so like your Vipers and some of those guys, those are definitely mercenaries.
Yeah, but
the organization itself is a terrorist organization, self-proclaimed.
That's no different than like the Taliban hiring in specialists to do certain jobs. I mean,
yeah.
So yeah,
I mean, you can merc for a terrorist group, but
you can merc for anybody. You can merc for Granny down the street if she needs that dog gone.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah,
they got money.
There is no like good or evil line that draws that, right? It's just whether or not you decide to start working solely for that organization and pushing the ideals versus getting the paycheck to do violence.
Okay. I'll go with that. So, is there any world where you've seen mercenaries used where you thought it was done badly? As far as the use of mercenaries, not the storytelling itself. Do you think there's a bad way to do that?
There's a joke about Blackwater in here somewhere. I know it.
If you find it,
honestly, in that there was that show Jericho in which they had a Blackwater stand in Ravenwood, but they just threw them in there. They weren't really mercenaries; they were just bad guys. So
yeah, but they were. Yeah, that was horribly done though.
Yeah, so that was
there's a
good show overall.
That is a kind of classic trope, though, a little bit in some TV shows, is taking a mercenary group and just making them the stand-in bad guy.
Yeah.
And that's like, in some ways it works. You need bodies to throw at the problem so the heroes can kill some people.
Yeah, they make really good faceless henchmen.
Yep.
But, yeah.
Yard trash.
Which is kind of how I exactly use them largely. In
you don't even have a name tag, dude. You're not going to survive this.
Yeah.
Your henchman number 4? Sorry, man.
Nobody thinks of the henchman.
So I see.
Yeah, you're a goner. Sorry, man.
One of my favorite
And you have a red shirt.
One of my favorite tropes with mercenaries you saw in the alternative historical reimagining, otherwise known as Braveheart, where the hired Irishmen change sides at the last minute.
Mm-hmm.
That's a common, I think, trope you can see with mercenaries. Where like, well, don't kill me, I'll pay you more than they will.
Yeah,
what was
that's the history of my people right there. The Irish, we've been mercs all over the world.
God damn it! What was the movie that had all the action hero stars in Dolph Lundgren?
Expendables.
Yeah,
Expendables.
That was epic. I mean, you get all the action hero stars together into one place, kicking ass, blowing shit up. It was beautiful.
But were they mercenaries or were they just retirees that wanted to be left alone?
Both.
No, they were mercs.
They were mercs, yeah.
They wanted to be left alone.
They classified themselves as mercenaries.
I thought they were former CIA.
They were former
everything. They were
former everything in there.
Wasn't John Paul former Legion? I don't know.
Have you not seen the Expendables, JR?
I have, but I thought they were black ops kind of government stooges, not necessarily mercs. But black ops gets real murky on, are they because the government denies it? Are they mercenaries or are they government employees? It's murky for a reason. Obviously, that's what the government wants.
So they were a merc company that got hired for black ops, and that's what you're thinking of, is that, like, I think 2 of their stories are based around getting hired on a black op, and then that gave the U.S. government an ability to disavow them when they went in and blew a bunch of shit up.
Well, that started out as a comic book, didn't it? Or graphic novel?
I
the Losers?
So. The Expendables?
Losers was a comic book like that.
The Losers was another movie, but yeah. I know that was a comic book.
I need to read more Mercs comic books. Apparently, I should be able to talk on this. I'm the
There's your
comic
own
book
work.
dude.
I used to read a lot of Merc books, the Dorsai and the White Regiment. I'm sure if I go look at my bookshelf, I could find some more. But
Well, there are
I think it was
two.
largely BattleTech for me.
There are two
Yeah,
in
they did it in
fantasy
Valdemar. Good.
that stood out to me, which was recently was Ryria Chronicles by Michael J. Sullivan, and then the young adult series, The Ranger's Apprentice, is questionably Mercenary from John Flanagan.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But I think technically the Rangers themselves worked for a particular government, but they were allowed to get hired out to the other states, which is essentially
like
what
that
most
same.
of those books were about.
Yeah.
So
if you are in your nation's army, but they let you hire yourself out for side jobs when you're doing those side jobs by our agreed upon definition, then that would be mercenary work, we would say.
so long as you're not doing it at the behest of your own government, right?
Yeah, as long as they're
If the
not telling you
political-
what contracts to take,
Yep.
where to go, where to fight. If you
Yeah, but if you're still
autonomy.
part of the military, isn't that a conflict of interest?
If
they're
you
releasing
are
you-
part of the U.S. government military, yes, that is. But
Yes.
in a lot of other militaries, they don't have that problem.
Really?
You know, going
Yeah.
back to the Hessians again, if they had the autonomy to choose their own contracts, then that puts them as the mercenary again.
Actually,
Although I
I think
will-
it wasn't until after World War II that the Royal Armed Forces of the UK actually put it in that they couldn't take side
Other
contracts.
jobs.
So
It's a gray area in the U.S. because we had people that fought in World War I and World War II, American citizens that joined foreign armies so they could get in the fight before we did. Technically, that's against our law, but nobody enforced it as long as they were fighting for our allies.
well, we've got people in Ukraine now.
Not
What?
officially.
No, don't. I don't know anything you're talking about.
They are working for the Ukrainian Legion, I'm sure. No connection to Uncle Sugar.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's one of the things that I think, coming back to what you said earlier, Jen, I think that gray area where does it count, doesn't it count, like that's part of what makes it a good storytelling trope, because there's so much room for gray, I think.
Mhm.
So
Yeah. Deciding where you want it to go, because like adventurers in most D&D campaigns are very often they're mercs for hire, or are they adventurers? Are they a little bit of both? And you can play with those definitions and those
Murder hobos.
lines all over everywhere, because you get a lot of that if you play role-playing games for very long. You're a little group, you get hired by somebody, they're going to pay you in gold if you go and decimate those goblins or whatever, which is just another nation. Go over to the goblin nation, dance all over them, bring back their bones, and you get paid for it. So
well, hold on.
90% of every D&D campaign I was in, we were all
Yeah,
And-
Murder
sellswords.
Hobo.
You know,
In our defense,
in a bar or a pub.
we were rolling dice in the South, and in the South, they just needed killing as a valid excuse.
It's true.
Murder hobos.
Yeah.
Yep. Absolute murder hobos. There's kind of some mercenary, there's some real mercenary definitions in there with being, the murder hobos that run around and destroy all sorts of things. I'm sure from the point of view of the goblins, we are terrible mercenaries as adventurers.
So I think we've walked all around the idea of of this topic, and the final conclusion is it just depends. And I think we keep circling back to that. So rather than drag it out, I
I found some common elements: the capability of violence, the threat of the risk of violence, things like that. Autonomy
And
from a
money.
national government.
Money is a big element.
Got to be paid.
And what makes a good story?
There you go.
I think that's one thing
pay
we're
me to
missing.
commit
Is what
violence.
makes a good mercenary story?
okay. Before you got to run, Casey, what do you think makes a good mercenary story?
What makes a good mercenary story? Putting them in the contract gone bad is really the kind of classic mercenary story trope that kind of works the best. I think it's not what they thought it was. Everything is going horribly wrong. That's where all the conflict and all the tension is coming from, and then they got to figure their way out of it. They work together. You got a colorful cast of characters. That's something that you can do easily with mercenary stories. You can have a wide range of different skill sets and personalities that come together. You can have, a crazier range of people than maybe your standard sort of cookie cutter military soldiers. That obviously we know it's grander than that, but you can have definitely the people that, the people that definitely shouldn't be serving in the military. They can be, the cyber expert, or maybe the diplomat, or the smooth talker, stuff like that. They can serve roles that a normal military wouldn't have. So we can have the colorful cast of characters in desperate situations, the contract gone bad. I think that's my summary there.
The
All right,
double
so
cross, those are my favorite parts.
Nick, hold
The
that
double
thought
cross,
real
right.
quick. So, Casey, before you have to bounce, because got the pilot thing, and I'm sure you're going to go into the wild blue yonder. Where can listeners and viewers at home find you? And it'll be in the show notes.
All right. You can definitely find me at www.caseymorris.net, my webpage. It sucks. I'm working on it, but just you can find my books and things. You can definitely find me on Amazon, as long as you tell it that you're looking for Casey Moores with an S and not Casey Moore. It'll tell you. It'll ask you if you meant Casey Moore. You did not. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram. I think I'm Casey Moore's Writer on Facebook, and Casey Moops on Instagram. And then at any one of those places, you can find a way to sign up for my newsletter and hear about special operations through time and get some snippets from my upcoming work. So there you go.
Outstanding. All right, Nick, you were saying what makes a good mercenary story. We appreciate you stopping by, Casey.
There's always
All right. I'll take off. See you guys.
the eventual double cross in mercenary stories. It's whoever hired you wants to get out of not paying you after you've already done the job. I think that's one of the tropes I enjoy most about mercenary stories, because then it kind of turns into like more of a revenge tale. It's like, oh, these guys tried to double cross us and we almost died, so let's go after them. And you see that quite a bit in mercenary tales.
Okay. Do you have anything to add since you asked the question, William?
Yeah, I think it's about the people. It always boils down to the people. What goes wrong? How do they interact? And when they have to make those really hard decisions, how do they decide? And I think mercenary stories really cover that well, in that you have someone, they're there for money. Usually, most of the time, they're there for money. But then they have to make other decisions. They have to make moral decisions. Yeah, we're supposed to take this hill, but there's a bunch of civilians on there. So do we still take the hill and kill the civilians, or do we lose money? So it's a lot of hard decisions and a lot of people decisions that have to be made that really make the story, I think, worth it.
Well, that's the stress, the drama that gets built up, and that's just good storytelling.
But mercenary stories make it a lot easier because you have so many different things to pull from. You've got the contract gone bad. You've got the, what do I do about these civilians? It's going to be a fight, and that, there's going to be conflict.
Yeah, there's going to be action. There's going to be things going boom.
But beyond that, you've got the different people from different organizations thrown together. So there's just so much potential there with the interpersonal conflict beyond just the doing it for money. That's my thoughts.
I think I was going to say, I think one of the things that you can do with a mercenary story, so that's one of the reasons I like writing Everyman, is because if you're talking about a true special forces unit, they're a well-oiled machine. You're not going to get as much of the characters as you would on a Hollywood TV show in real life when they're in the action. So the chance for those quips and those one-liners, they're all professional all the time, mostly. Where mercenaries, much like when you write the everyday soldier, you can have them do whatever the hell they want because, rules what rules. So you can have them have the flamboyant armor that looks cool on a cover, or, gives them non-standard features that no one else has because, they're equipping themselves largely.
Well,
that was something I was going to add. Oh, sorry, Hillbilly.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I was going to add that particular piece, JR, because, you took it to kind of like the nice aesthetic piece, right? The internal stuff where it's like, yeah, I have to pay for myself. So, I don't need a uniform. I don't need all this stuff. So I can do it. I can decorate it how I want. I can look how I want. But take that rule set one step further, and that's where you get some of the better merc stories that play into all the different tropes, which is when the rules don't matter, what is this person gonna do? right? When the rules don't hold you accountable for anything, because in like today's day and age, you have certain amounts of the laws of war you have to follow, but not all of it. And depending on if a country's backing you, that kind of thing, like you get into some real murky waters real quick on the international stage of what you can and can't get away with. And it really just depends on who's backing you. And then like you start getting into some of these universes, the Four Horsemen universe is famous for it. There are very few rules in their laws of war in the galaxy. So you're already, and that's part and parcel of the fact that they're mercenaries. How do you hold them accountable? So now you can kind of get the merc companies even internally, like we were talking about the internal conflicts that start disagreeing with what we need to do in these different scenarios.
Well, and JR, you mentioned about the individuality. Not necessarily. Now, it all depends on the company, because, a merc company is usually made of ex-military members. Those ex-military members, they need that unity. They need that solid base. That's one reason why, after World War II, you had motorcycle groups like the Booze Fighters, the Hells Angels, the Outlaws. They came up and they had uniforms. They had rank structure that fit exactly what they had left in the army, because that's what they knew. They were back together with brothers that they could trust, who had their back, because the civilian world didn't understand them when they came back. So, that's one of those things. Depends on how you write it and how you create it. But if you add those elements and layer them in there, it can be important to have that uniformity, even though they have some bit of individuality with, like, they might have had a war trophy where they got an Iron Cross off of a German or something, and they wore that, or they put it on their bike, So those are little things that you can balance out and play with.
Good options. Lots and lots of options.
Yeah.
Well, and the difference between mercs who are just the thugs and the henchmen and a story that's actually about the mercs comes down to I have to root for them. And very often when they're the nameless, faithless henchmen, it's mercenary squad, whatever. And I don't care when they get blown up much. They're there to be in the way of the story. They're there as that kind of thing. But if you're going to tell me a story about mercs, whether they're doing morally gray things or anything else, I have to want to go on this journey with those people. And so that's bringing through that individuality of who they are and what drives them and what brings them together. Because that Band of Brothers story, we want to read that. We like seeing these guys and girls who are tied together by bigger things. And as long as I want to go on the journey with them, then it's great. Otherwise, they're a bunch of thugs who are getting paid. So it comes back to that storytelling that says, make me want to come on a journey with them.
Yeah, why do I give a crap factor?
Okay, how's this for a screwed up story idea? What if the mercenary company, part of their contract of signing up was they could be cloned as many times as needed to be able to get the job done? So if that meant they were quick cloned and then they were thrown out there and then they blew up, okay, here's the next one. Go. Crap. Next one. How many times can you blow up the clones before they just stop?
That doesn't
before it's not fun anymore.
That starts getting into like altered carbon territory.
That would be a screwed up scenario to try to write. Oh my God. What life am I on this time? Okay, how many times have we blown up? Okay, let's not do that again. Let's do it from the left this time.
Yeah.
You gotta like tattoo their number on their lip.
Here's 5 of you. Go do
11.
this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Damn it.
Create 5 of you. Go do it.
I don't think Stabby can handle it. She can barely handle me, let alone 5 of me.
I think the problem is you have to kill the original, because the original knows everything.
Well, so the original is the one that's cloning himself to send them out to be the fodder so he can stand back and rack in the cash.
Yeah.
See, now it's Calvin and Hobbes.
Yeah, but then the clones are learning as you go, and how do you make them keep going?
They'll get better.
They know what you know.
I mean, that is Calvin and Hobbes, where he had 5 of himself, and at a certain point, he's like, they're all getting in trouble, and every single one of them is blaming me. It's one thing when you know you're throwing them into the exact scenario, but you start cloning yourself, and a mercenary troop completely full of clones of yourself is going to very quickly dissolve into something else. They won't stay
And
clones
you know how
very
much
long.
you can. Yeah, you
They
know how
touch
much
on
you
that
can
in the
trust
Bad
yourself.
Batch.
Mm-hmm.
Well, isn't that the whole concept of the Clone Wars and Star Wars?
Yeah, and
Yeah,
the Bad
is that
Batch.
it's long.
If you need to watch that, those were the defective clones, the ones that weren't your rank and file clones. That whole series is awesome. And it really kind of delves into what we talk about here right now. Because they were mercenaries, because they couldn't go back to
Mhm.
the Empire. The Republic was gone. Order 66 has happened. Now they're starting to get rid of the clones because they could be influenced, and they were expensive. And then you start getting conscripts, the other stormtroopers. So now that you got a bunch of defective clones that were all about the Republic that are trying to make their way in the universe, and now they can't go to the org. They don't have the support that they had before, which is made for some very interesting stories in that part of the Star Wars universe.
And as usual with Nick, it always comes back to Star Wars. Dun dun dun.
Dude, it's
I'm
like
amazed you didn't
Lucasfilm
go
threw
for
up
the
at my house,
Mandalorian
bro.
reference.
Okay. Was there any other aspects of the Mercenaries, or have we already exhausted our opportunities here? All right. Go ahead.
Just one other thing. There was one book a while back called The White Regiment by, I think, I forget the name, Dalmas or something. But they were there because it was part of the religion.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking that there might have been other mercenary groups in our history that were mercenaries because of the religion.
Yeah. John
It
Dalton.
was their goal to go. Okay, yeah. So he
I'm
had
sure
a couple
some of the
books, but I don't
Crusaders
saw
were
one.
that way.
Well, yeah, were the Crusaders Mercs?
A bunch of the Crusaders were that way.
Yeah.
In fact, like the Templar are both half religious army for the Catholic Church, but really they were technically Mercs. They weren't a part of the Catholic Church until they were hired. But then you have like the Woods Knights.
They were
ahead.
originally getting hired on to escort the pilgrims, wasn't it?
Yes, but they were still a monastic order. They still took vows of poverty. So the money that they made went to the Catholic Church through the brotherhood that was the Knights Templar.
So what made them Mercs?
So
instead of religious,
they didn't. The big argument, right? So the reason the Templar end up being eradicated was because they weren't paying the Catholic Church. They weren't paying their dues to the countries they were staying in, and
So
that was when you found out how truly mercenary they were.
So technically, they were paying the Catholic Church. The issue was the King of France wanted their gold so he could wage more wars with England. It had, I mean, I don't know, their takedown didn't prove anything other than that they had good propaganda. I don't know. I don't see. I wouldn't qualify them as mercenaries. Yes, they did. They took payment for the services they offered to the pilgrims, but it didn't go to the individual soldiers. They were agents of the church.
They gave it to they were agents of the church hired by different countries at different times, but they gave it to. They didn't give it direct to the Catholic Church. They gave it to organizations that they worked with, and so that was kind of the big thing, because what we ended up happening with the French Inquisition was that the French had successfully taken over the Catholic Church. And that's when they found out, that's when the propaganda hit that they had all this money that they hadn't been paying in, that they'd been putting elsewhere. The idea of the Knights' hidden treasure at that point springs forth. And really, the argument now is whether or not the treasure ever existed, or whether or not the French at that point felt threatened by the political capital that the Templar held.
So the issue with the money gets a little complicated because there wasn't banking. So some of the money that they had wasn't actually their money. They were holding it for pilgrims. So, okay, well, you put the gold that you would need for this and keep it here safe with us, and then we give you credit that you can use to pay along the way, and then you cash back out on the way out minus whatever you spend. So I don't know. That's why it gets murky for me. I wouldn't consider that mercenary. They were just armed bankers, essentially.
mercenary banking, because they had branches all the way down to.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, that's interesting. We would love to hear what you think, dear listener, dear viewer at home. Would you qualify the Templars specifically as mercenaries? I don't know that I would, but Shady had some good arguments too, so we're gonna call that a draw. But we'd love for you to weigh in. Did anybody else have anything they wanted to throw in before we let you guys tell us what you're working on and where they can find you?
I think we're not getting paid enough to keep talking about this subject.
All right, then we're gonna let you go first, since we wouldn't want to make
Y'all are
more
getting
money.
paid?
Are we gonna start marching towards JR's house? Is that the next move?
Yeah,
absolutely.
just
Contract gone bad. We got to go. Wring it out of JR.
so Jana, what are you writing right now?
I am currently working on a science fiction romance, and that will hopefully come out a little bit later this year, and a billionaire romance that we don't talk about on this channel because it's that squishy stuff. But the science fiction is good stuff, and it's going to be lots of fun. And they can find me at www.opalkingdompress.com and all over the internet under Jenna Ray or Jenna Ray Author.
So, if she's marrying him for his money, does that make her a mercenary?
Ooh, that's a good question. Well, in this particular one, she is coming to a set of mercenaries that broke away from their planet because they didn't like the way things were being run. So she is joining an ex-mercenary group. They might be mercenaries again. I haven't decided yet.
Nice.
I
All
joined
right,
an mercenary army.
Yep.
I
all
think
right. William, what are you writing, and how can they find you?
Dear God.
Oh, there's two Williams. Crap. Okay, go, Hillbilly.
Oh, go ahead, man.
No, you go. I'm
Oh,
No, you hang up. Come on, guys.
I've been cranking through.
No, I love you more.
I've been working my way through a bunch of Braxton stories for a bunch of different anthologies. I've also been working on the first modern JTF 13 novel. It's going to be more action thriller instead of historical fiction, along with outlining the next Car Wars novel and working on the first Braxton novel. So you can find me at williamjosephroberts.com or threeravenspublishing.com, and just search it on Google and you'll find me, because I'm on so many freaking social media pages I lost track of them all. Yeah, there
you go. All right. What about you, Shady? What are you writing, and how can they find you?
I've already mentioned it at least once, but I'm writing a epic companion novel for the Four Horsemen universe soon to come out. Got a couple other stories in the works, mostly for Chris Kennedy Publishing. But you can find me anywhere that you can look up David Shadoin, especially at www.davidshadoin.com, and you can pretty much branch out to everywhere that I am present from there.
Okay. And finally, last but not least, the other William, Mr. William S. Frisbee Jr.
Oh, so I've got all sorts of stuff going on, but my primary objective is to get the Last Marines, the next arc, plotted out and planned. And while I'm working on that, I'm also doing a fantasy series, and I'm also working on a hard science fiction book, which is,
Sweet.
not military science fiction. It's more of the how technical can I get kind of stuff.
So in this episode will come out after your Last Marines interview, but would you consider those guys, because they're not fighting for their country anymore since it doesn't exist, would they be considered mercenaries?
No, because they have a definite goal. They're fighting for ideology, not money.
All right. And before we let you go, Nick, what are you working on right now?
Right now, I am outlining the pages for Corbin and Sparrow, which I think is going to be our next book out. It depends on what gets done first. That, and I'm finishing up approving scripts for the Phantom Hawk Resolute miniseries, where he's going to live on a houseboat and have a submarine, which I'm excited about, because I've never drawn a submarine before, and I think that so it's going to be like the Bat Boat but cooler. And then I'm doing a lot of concept design for some of these crazy characters that my writer is creating that I didn't have already in the inventory. I'm like, what does he look like? He's like, I don't know, make him look cool. I'm like, Jesus Christ. I'll do my best.
Nice.
That's my job in this world, is to make things look cool. So, but the Corvin and Sparrow one I'm really excited about. It's about an excommunicated member of a ancient society of watchers that collect the entire wealth of human knowledge and protect it. And that organization goes rogue, and now she's kind of like fighting them along with some high tech corporate types that want to steal the information. So it kind of creates like a little struggle with her. Like, do I protect the organization that kicked me out, or do I fight these guys? And it's going to get weird, and it's going to be fun.
So would that be like Shades of the Librarian series?
I've never read that. You're going to have to give me a little bit more information.
We'll talk offline. It's two different universes have had the concept of the library of all knowledge, with like these mercenary, well, not really mercenary, this organization that keeps the information and doles it out as they see fit. So when is the Pendragon Brothers you're doing with Jana coming out?
We'll get there. We'll
We'll get there.
We'll get
All
there.
right, well,
It's
then,
coming.
this is the part of the
It's
interview, dear listener, dear viewer, where I remind you to please be kind and speak your mind on the reviewing platforms. Your reviews help the right readers find the right books, so do your part, people. And with that being said, you can find us on our Linktree, linktr.ee, Linktree/Blasters and Blades Podcast. Again, Linktree/Blasters and Blades Podcast, where we link to all the things, the BitChutes, the Rumbles, the YouTubes, the Twitters, our email, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. Again, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com for professional purposes only. We have our Facebook group and Facebook page, and most importantly, we have Madam Stabby Stab's Instagram, Twitter, and email. Maybe we'll talk her into sharing some of the pictures of all the food she's making, and you could get fat just looking at it, because she's not sharing with us. No lemon squares for us.
So sad. So sad.
We have our website at anchor.fm/blasters-and-blades. Again, anchor.fm/blasters-and-blades, where for as little as 99 cents a month, you can help keep the lights on. These episodes aren't free to produce, and every penny counts, people. You can support the show more directly at buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comment section that it is for the podcast, and I will keep my co-hosts duly caffeinated. They will drink that coffee brand coffee until it pours out of their eye sockets. And if you use the link in the show notes for Coffee Brand Coffee and the code Podcast Grunts, you get 10% off. And Stabby and I have been going all bougie with their coffee flavors, so I'm digging it. None of that MRE coffee for me anymore. No, sir. All right. And with that said, thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For my crazy co-host, I am J.R. Handley, and this was the Blasters and Blades Podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time, where we indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom. Thanks for coming on, guys. We were all over the place, a lot more chaotic than we normally do, but I was here for it, nodding along. So we're going to call out a wrap. So we'll see you guys next time.
Cool. Thanks,
Bye, y'all.
JR.